여러분 안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon. Welcome to the first Yonhapnews Future Economic Forum. We're your MCs Tae-wang and Chang Hae-rin from Yonhapnews TV. We would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who've taken time out of your busy schedule to attend the first Future Economy Forum hosted by Yonhapnews Agency. As a national news agency representing Korean media, Yonhap will continue to make greater efforts to contribute to the revitalization of the Korean media ecosystem and strengthen Korea's information sovereignty in the international community. The theme of this year's inaugural Future Economic Forum is post-U.S. presidential election, the heated race for high-tech supremacy. Today's event was organized by Yonhap to explore various strategies and future discourses needed for Korea's economic growth. Let us now kick off the first Yonhapnews Future Economic Forum.
네, 그럼 첫 순서
Let's start by listening to the opening remarks by CEO of Yonhapnews Agency, Mr. Hwang Dae-il. A big hand, please.
네, 안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon. I'm CEO of Yonhapnews Agency, Hwang Dae-il. It's an honor for Yonhapnews Agency, one of Korea's key news outlets, to be holding the very first Yonhapnews Future Economic Forum. Let me extend my gratitude to National Assembly Wang Jong-yun, third Deputy Director of the National Security, and Vice Minister Park Sung-taek from the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, and also Mr. Jo Yoon-kyung from the Industry Organization. I would also like to thank participants from business, government, and the academia for joining the event despite your very busy schedules. This forum was prepared to diagnose the global industrial ecosystem and to explore development strategies for Korean economy to make another leap forward. And it's being organized by Yonhapnews Agency, and in this forum, our discussions will be focused on semiconductors given the increasingly intense competition for high-tech supremacy among great powers. This is also to revisit the successful history of Korea's semiconductor industry that marks the 50th anniversary this year and showcase our determination to create a super gap for the future. We live in an age of technopolitics where advanced technology has a profound impact on not only the economy, but also international politics, diplomacy, and security. This means that the biggest determinant of the world's ruling order is no longer military power, but technological prowess. In fact, major countries are being rapidly repositioned based on their technological prowess. The economic territory of the Korean Peninsula, which was once a small country in Northeast Asia, during the geopolitical era has expanded dramatically in the Asia-Pacific and beyond in the age of technopolitics. In this digital world, semiconductors are the backbone of many cutting-edge industries, including artificial intelligence, UAM, stretchable displays, humanoid robots, hypersonic aerospace, and more. It's worth noting that cutting-edge technology is a significant challenge that determines the survival of not just businesses, but all of us. Yonhapnews Agency, Korea's leading news outlet based on the largest domestic and global coverage network, has been reporting on the escalation of the race for semiconductor supremacy into a battle for fate among nations. The roar of the global industrial battlefront is expected to grow louder and the flames to spread even faster, especially with the recent victory of President-elect Trump, who campaigned on America First platform. The global trade landscape can change quickly, with the Biden administration's support for semiconductors quickly losing steam and the Trump administration's protectionist policies gaining momentum. Our government may need to completely rethink its industrial policy to prepare for these upheavals. and countries may need to strive further to prime the pump for the development of high-tech companies that are committed to innovation and also make efforts to deregulate this industry. The Korean Peninsula has a long history of temporarily bending but not breaking under the threat of great powers. Thanks to the wisdom of its leaders who have repeatedly found a way out at the crossroads of national survival. We have a rich history of not just surviving crises but leapfrogging them. I look forward to insights to be shared here today to rediscover the ancestral DNA of overcoming crises and making quantum jumps for national development. I believe that news agencies such as AP, Xinhua, and Kyoto, which lead the global news market, have come to cover this event because they fully recognize the importance and significance of the discussions that will be held under this event. Yonhapnews Agency will mobilize all its coverage capabilities to help Korea enter the G7 as soon as possible. We will mobilize all our resources. We'll also be the first to report on the activities of our semiconductor heroes and businesses who are winning victories on the industrial front at home and abroad. Finally, I would like to thank our participants, both domestic and foreign, again for joining us. Thank you very much. A big hand again, please. The CEO has kicked open this event, the first Yonhapnews Agency Future Economic Forum. Thank you again, Mr. Hwang, for that warm remarks. We will next listen to the congratulatory remarks by President Yoon Seong-chang of the Republic of Korea. He is currently attending the APEC summit in Peru, so Mr. Wang Yun-dong, the third Deputy Director of National Security, will read the message on his behalf. A big hand, please. Good afternoon. I'm the third Deputy Director of National Security. Let me read the message from President Yoon Seong-chang. Congratulations on holding the first Yonhapnews Future Economic Forum. I would like to extend my gratitude to the organizers from the Yonhapnews Agency for holding this important event. And I would also like to congratulate and thank the participants and the businesses and researchers who are leading the way for Korea to become a powerhouse in semiconductors. After the US election last week, the year of super election is coming to an end. We are now facing a competition of technology supremacy, and the world is currently keenly interested in the future direction. This change in the landscape will be driven by AI and digital technology. As a result, the tensions and anxiousness of the businesses have been increasing. I believe the ability to overcome these challenges comes from technology. We have been overcoming various crises and turning them into opportunity and made new leaps forward thanks to continuous efforts to develop technology. In the competition age of high-tech, ideas and technology will gain more importance. So it's imperative that businesses, government, and academia work together to secure a super gap in our industry. For this, the government will make investments for technology development. At the same time, innovation of businesses will lead to higher competitiveness of industries by laying down the foundation to support them. Especially for the semiconductor industry, we will actively support companies to secure super gap. And the largest mega cluster in the world for semiconductors will be completed as soon as possible, and we will continuously support the semiconductor industry with 26 trillion won worth of investment. And we will become one of the 3 superpowers in AI by expanding infrastructure and investing in the private sector, and also adopting digital technology faster, and also working on AI national security. I look forward to the insights that will be shared today that will contribute to Korea setting a new milestone in the development of our cutting-edge industries. Based on the super gap, Korean businesses will continue to grow and the government will spare no efforts in supporting them. Thank you. And this was the message from President Yoon Suk-yeol.
Although President Yoon wasn't able to join us in person, we would like to extend our gratitude to President Yoon for that warm congratulatory message and also to Third Deputy Director Wang as well. Next, we will have a congratulatory address from Chairman. We were supposed to have a congratulatory address from Lee Chol-yeol, National Assembly's Trade, Industry, Energy, and SME and Startups Committee. Let me read on his behalf. Ladies and gentlemen, congratulations on the first Yonhapnews Future Economic Forum. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to President Hwang and all the related staff members for all your efforts in organizing today's event. I would like to thank all of the speakers joining us for congratulatory addresses and also for the presentations as well. Semiconductor encompasses AI, future mobility, display, computing, power, robots, and much more. A foundation for all bleeding edge and cutting edge technology, going beyond the basic industry, politics, diplomacy. These are all domains where this strategic asset now has clout. A new administration now in place and a new policy direction to be set in the U.S. will bring about monumental changes to our semiconductor industry, where we, too, need to make meticulous preparations. Through today's forum, I hope that we will be able to find and secure some opportunities for our domestic industries in Korea and find a new chapter for growth in semiconductors in Korea. As the chairman of the National Assembly's Trade, Industry, Energy, SMEs, and Startups Committee, I will continue to put my best foot forward to give all of our support. And once again, congratulations to the first Future Economic Forum. I wish all of you the best in happiness and health. Thank you very much. November 14th, 2024, Chairman Lee Chol-gyu of the National Assembly's Trade, Industry, Energy, SMEs, and Startups Committee. That was me reading on his behalf. Chairman Lee, just before the opening ceremony, actually was supposed to join us, and Representative Kim Won-hee, who serves as the Opposition Secretary of the National Assembly's Trade, Industry, Energy, SMEs, and Startups Committee, visited this event to offer his congratulations and expressed his regret about not being able to attend this main event due to prior commitments. And I'd like to extend our gratitude to our esteemed members of the National Assembly's Committee for their dedication. Next, we will have a congratulatory address from the First Vice Minister, Park Sun-taek, of the Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. Please give our Vice Minister a big hand. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, as introduced, my name is Park Sun-taek. I'm the First Vice Minister, Ministry of Trade, Industry, and Energy. The most accurate and the fastest media outlet in Korea, Yonhapnews, is now hosting the first Future Economic Forum under a very timely and meaningful theme. On that note, I'd like to extend my gratitude to President Hwang for all of his efforts. Even if it weren't for the presidential election, the power struggle between the nations is truly on level of a warfare to gain hegemony and dominance over cutting-edge technology. We have now seen unprecedented subsidies and also modernization of infrastructure at a scale and scope that we have never seen before. Bringing in talents is not just an agenda at the corporate level, but also a national level as well. The methodologies and tools and methods may change, but the national competition surrounding cutting-edge technologies will continue to become a fiercer race towards dominance and hegemonic power. AI, quantum, and bio, these three strategic technologies will determine the tech lead that countries have in the future. However, whether it be AI, quantum, or bio, These technologies must be enabled by chips. That is the precondition, which means that semiconductor is a precondition to having this type of dominance. This is why the US against China has continued to take actions in terms of semiconductors, and through the Chips and Science Act has doubled down on its efforts to attract investments in semiconductors and cutting-edge technology. In Korea as well, we are putting forth aggressive strategies to maintain our competitiveness in semiconductors. As Third Deputy Director Wang mentioned, our plans are well underway, and the K-CHIPS Act, which is a investment tax break for tax deductions and benefits, is also underway to prop up the semiconductor industry and cutting-edge industry as a whole. Government policies, in one word, is really about moving all of the boulders out of the way and propping up what is right. And this is what we are doing from the government side to provide all that we can do in terms of support. Half of success is from satisfaction, and the other half comes from failure. The failure that we may have experienced in the past and may experience in the future will, without a doubt, lay the foundation for stronger growth in the future. With the end of the presidential election, there is rampant uncertainty across the world. We have prepared for numerous different scenarios, and we will nimbly and with agility make preparations and act on our plans thus far. Thank you very much. Please give a big hand, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Vice Minister Park for that congratulatory address, and we will move on to the next congratulatory remark to be delivered by Chairman Choi Tae-won of the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Chairman Choi has kindly shared his congratulatory message via video. Let's now turn our attention to the screen for this congratulatory address. Good afternoon. My name is Choi Tae-won from the KCCI. I sincerely congratulate you on the inauguration of the first Future Economic Forum. I would like to ask for your understanding that I am relaying my congratulatory address via video as I have prior commitments abroad. I would also like to extend my gratitude to CEO Hwang of Yonhapnews for organizing this auspicious event. Our theme is the advanced tech power struggle post-U.S. election. The competition for advanced technology dominance between the U.S. and China, initially centered on semiconductors, has now extended into the AI domain. From an industrial structure perspective, the previously taken for granted low-cost, high-efficiency supply chain framework has been uprooted. Each nation's efforts to dominate advanced industries now resembles a nation-to-nation competition and rivalry. Companies are increasingly confronted with an unprecedented level of uncertainty, often referred to as zero visibility. While they are struggling to find solutions, identifying a supply chain solution that balances cost and reliability remains extremely challenging. Frankly, it's hard to say if there is even a definitive right answer in sight. The issue of investment poses similar challenges. To what extent and for how long should we invest in this nascent AI industry? And to make such decisions without any guarantee about reliable returns is indeed a daunting and brutal task. Nonetheless, we cannot afford to sit on our laurels. Inaction would mean more than a loss just to individual businesses. It could lead to the forfeiture of wealth for national industries and the economy as a whole. That is why we need to be flexible. Companies cannot go at this alone. The government, private sector, and academia must unite to tackle the complex puzzle of supply chain restructuring and advanced industry investments in a new way moving forward. The role of media in fostering this kind of environment is equally critical, especially from Yonhapnews, a media institution that serves as a press for journalists. I hope Yonhapnews will continue to play a pivotal role in this regard. I hope today's event will serve as a good stepping stone opportunity for companies and provide a platform for productive discussions. Thank you very much.
Yes, that was the video from Mr. Choi, CEO of SK. We'll now move on to the messages sent by various officials to congratulate this event, starting with Mr. Yu Jin, the chairman of the Federation of Korean Industries. Let me read out the message on his behalf. I'd like to congratulate the Yonhapnews agency on organizing the first Future Economy Forum. The Korean economy is facing new challenges such as AI, digital transformation, and eco-friendly innovations. These are important changes that have a profound impact on our industries and our daily lives. I hope that this forum will be a meaningful venue for valuable discourse on enhancing the global competitiveness of high-tech industries and a bright future for the Korean economy. I hope that you will continue to lead the positive changes in the economy and industries with your prompt and in-depth coverage, and I wish Yonhapnews Agency all the best. Thank you. Let me read out the next congratulatory message. It's from Vice Chairman Han Jong-wi of Samsung Electronics. Let me read it out for you. As Korea and Samsung Electronics celebrate the 50th anniversary of their entry into the semiconductor sector, we're grateful to Yonhapnews Agency for organizing this meaningful event to review the current state of global semiconductor competition and explore strategies for further development. We sincerely congratulate you for organizing the Future Economy Forum, and we believe that the forum will help strengthen the competitiveness of the Korean semiconductor industry and derive sustainable development strategies. Thank you. Next, we will listen to the message from CEO Kwang No-jung of SK Hynix. I'd like to extend my sincere congratulations to Yonhapnews Agency for hosting the first Future Economy Forum. I'm confident that the future strategies and insights on our economy presented in this forum will be an important foundation for Korea to lead the global market in AI and semiconductor industries. I'd like to thank Yonhapnews Agency for hosting this important event and wish it a successful outcome. Thank you.
Allow me to introduce you to our next congratulatory message from President Cho Ju-won of LG Electronics. I'll read it on his behalf. I sincerely congratulate you on the inauguration of the first Future Economic Forum. As various technologies continue to drive transformative changes in human life, innovation and competition in the advanced tech field have also become central themes for LG Electronics as we advance beyond home appliances to become a smart life solutions company. With that said, I believe this timely forum will serve as an excellent opportunity to provide insights and inspiration for companies as they explore future strategies. I would also like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to CEO Hwang Dae-il and the leadership team of Yonhapnews on their appointments, and I hope that Yonhapnews will continue to serve as the eyes and ears guiding us towards the future of the economy. Thank you. Next will be a congratulatory video. Allow me to introduce Dr. Kang Gi-dong, the founder of Korea's first semiconductor company, Korea Semiconductor Corporation, established in Bucheon, Gyeonggi Province. Today, Dr. Kang has sent a congratulatory message from Reno, Nevada, where he currently resides, to celebrate this forum and cheer on Korea's advanced tech companies. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy. Good afternoon, I am Kang Gi-dong. Today, the competition for semiconductor supremacy is fierce and entering a new phase and era. Against this backdrop, I wholeheartedly congratulate Yonhapnews on hosting the first Future Economic Forum with a focus on semiconductors. And it is my pleasure to extend my greetings to all the government officials, industry leaders, academics, researchers, and media representatives in attendance through this video. In particular, I extend my support to the growth of Korea's semiconductor companies, including Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. I wish success to everyone contributing to the formulation of semiconductor strategies, technological advancement, and industry development. And I wish you the best in health. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, a big hand, please. Dr. Kang is, as I understand, 90 years old. His heartfelt support for our companies is striving in the global market, and his enduring dedication to his homeland resonates deeply. We extend our sincere gratitude to Dr. Kang once again for taking the time to share his congratulatory message with us. This concludes the opening ceremony. After a brief pause to arrange the seating, we will begin the main program. We will begin after we set the stage. Today's forum is divided into three sessions. In the first session, Dr. Cheong Seong-chang, Director of the Center for Korea Peninsula Studies at the Sejong Institute, and Professor Chris Miller from Tufts University will deliver in-depth lectures on the topic shifts in the global advanced tech landscape and responses following the U.S. presidential election. So that will be session 1. And in the second session, Vice President Kim Hyun-woo of Samsung Electronics and Mr. Lin Hong-weng, advisor to Taiwan's Business Weekly Commonwealth, will share insightful and vivid perspectives on the race for supergap technology and future strategies. And the final session, we will address innovation in semiconductor and AI technology and the evolving advanced industry ecosystem. Professor Shin Chang-hwan of the Department of Semiconductor Engineering at Korea University and Dr. Lee Moon-tae, head of the Advanced ML Lab at LG AI Research Institute, will examine the current state and future directions of the cutting-edge industries. As introduced with the session topics, the upcoming sessions will focus on strategies and responses to navigate choices in the midst of global technological power competition. The sessions will be moderated by none other than Dr. Kwak Soo-jung, an economist and former senior researcher at the Samsung Economic Research Institute and currently the director of the Korean Economic Institute. Dr. Kwak is a global economics expert and the author of the recently published economic forecast book, The Great Economic Prediction.
네, 안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yonhapnews has truly put together a meaningful and auspicious event. My name is Kwak Soo-jung, Director of the Korean Economic Research Institute, and I'll be moderating today's sessions. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here. As CEO Hwang stated this for us well, but nation and societies prioritized issues, exploring those issues and making national agendas with these types of topics and bringing that to experts and policymakers is the role of media outlets and institutions. And in that sense, it truly seems that as we are at the precipice of an invisible war, the agenda for today is truly meaningful. We've mentioned this before, and we've heard it from our MCs, but we will be going over 3 topics in each of our respective 3 sessions with renowned and prominent experts from across the world and in Korea to look at what type of hegemonic competitiveness and plans we can make for the future from both the government and the private sector. It will be a platform for meaningful discussions, and so once again, it is a significant honor for me to guide you through today's proceedings at this event. The first session, although summarized by our MCs, will be surrounding the chip war. The chip war is truly, the tech war is an invisible war, and what type of power will bring supremacy to nations? That's what we're going to be looking into. So allow me to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Cheong Seong-chang, Director of the Center for Korea Peninsula Studies at the Sejong Institute. Dr. Chung is a renowned expert in the study and analysis of international relations, particularly with a focus on the Korean Peninsula. We look forward to his insights. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Chung with a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. As introduced, I am Cheong Seong-chang, Director of Sejong Institute and Center for Korean Peninsula Strategy. With the re-election of President-elect Trump, I believe there are a lot of concerns in Korea. So let's talk about kind of impact that there will be on Korea. When you look back on world history, I believe that the re-election of Trump will be a watershed moment. So it means that the times when he was elected for the first time, and with his re-election, there will be a lot of changes. So let's talk about how he was re-elected in this presidential election and its impact on the political landscape, as well as the Korean Peninsula, and our possible response. So this will be based on my research. So the world's eyes are on the results of the U.S. presidential election. If Kamala Harris won, I don't think that the world would be so nervous as we are right now. But with the re-election of Trump, the world is keenly interested in the possible change of the future. They're very tense. And right before the election, major media outlets, especially in the U.S., reported that there's a high likelihood that Kamala Harris will win, and also a lot of American experts in Korea made this same prediction. And before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of experts said that it won't do so, but as it turned out that it did, there was a lot of confusion. So after the U.S. presidential election, I met with a lot of U.S. experts, and when I talked to them, they also mentioned that there was a lot of confusion and chaos after the election. So there were some experts that got this right, and media outlets that got this right, a few of them. And when we look into the American society in an objective manner, we could have predicted correctly that President Trump would be elected. So why were so many misled? It's because of their misunderstanding of the status of the American society, such as the high inflation. So a lot of Koreans, after they visit the U.S. and come back, say the same thing. So around the time when there was a presidential campaign between Biden and Trump, I was in the U.S. And also I went there during COVID. And when I meet with people that have returned from the U.S., they talk about the high prices at restaurants and grocery stores. Another issue of the American society was the illegal immigration that led to disorder in the society, such as the streets, where you see a lot of homeless people in San Francisco, and there's a lot of theft and crime. So you can even see the stores leaving cities. So under the circumstances, when you look at the competitiveness of the U.S., well, it's still the superpower in the U.S., the strongest economy. But we have foreign and diplomatic experts that have a different perspective on the U.S. from Trump's perspective. The U.S. has a lot of advanced technology, but when you think of commercialization, there's not many. Semiconductors are led by Korea and Taiwan, and shipbuilding is driven by Korea and China. And when you look at home appliance market, the country that's sweeping the world is actually Korea. So there's iPhone that's competing with Galaxy in the smartphone market, but other than that, there's no flagship product on the commercial market that the U.S. can boast. And also due to the infrastructure, there has been a narrowing gap in the technological competition with China. So the Americans have been sensing a crisis, and Trump 1.0 emphasized on this issue as well. But in his second term, he will be doubling down on this issue, and that could impact the Korean society due to the tariff war. If trade decreases in Korea, there of course would be an influence. But we need to have a broader scope. There are areas where we can in fact benefit from Trump's re-election. When you look at the economic relations with China, in many ways, China has caught up with us and even is ahead of us. But the trade war between the U.S. and China could in fact widen this gap between us and China, because the U.S. is keen on widening the technological gap with China, and it will come with new policies under the America First philosophy that could provide opportunities for Korea. So we should not have an outright negative perspective on Trump's re-election. But due to this negative view, I believe there was an impact on the prediction of news outlets in Korea, saying that Kamala Harris has a high possibility of winning. And as you see in this picture, you can see these tents set out by homeless people, not only in other cities. You can see them in Washington and even near the Department of Defense. So it's very dangerous to walk on the streets after a certain time. So America is unlike the past, and there is a sense of crisis, which has been one of the pillars of Trump's campaign. So under Trump, they will try to once again become an economic superpower. They will reshore American companies to America. And because of the slowdown in the infrastructure sector, although the U.S. wants to generate nuclear power, it costs a lot of time and money to build new NPPs. And as mentioned, in terms of shipbuilding, U.S.'s capability is 1/200th of China. China is a continental country, but U.S. was able to have supremacy thanks to its strong naval force. But in terms of shipbuilding, the U.S. currently faces a serious level of crisis. Because of this issue, Trump is saying negative comments about U.S. spending on protecting the security of other countries. It's not that he is stingy, arguing for an increased military spending by Korea and other countries. He is keen on the sense of crisis in America, and this is something that we need to understand when we reconsider our relationship with the U.S. Trump has also had negative views on NATO and on the fact that America needs to protect a rich country as Korea. He has made several negative comments. To maintain the U.S. forces in Korea, U.S. is spending too much, he said, and asked for an increase of military spending by Korea by 9-fold. And I felt that clearly when I was in the U.S. early 2021. When I turned on the TV, in advertisement, I could see monitors and TV from Samsung and and also home appliances, including washing machines from LG. Korea is leading the home appliance market. So on American TV, you can see that Korea is a rich country. But due to the lack of budget, the U.S. is at the brink of having to reduce their military spending, defense spending. So Trump's position is that he wants to divert this money to revitalizing the American economy. So there is a possibility that there will be a rapid change in his policy toward Korea and defense spending as well as NATO. During Trump 1.0, about withdrawing or reducing the scale of U.S. forces in Korea was opposed by his advisors. But the longer his term became, the cabinet was filled by loyalists and hardliners. And under Trump 2.0, with a 90 to 100% probability, there will only be loyalists in the cabinet who are yes men to Trump. So we need to get ready for a weakened defense or security commitment by Trump administration. And the gap with China has been continuously being narrowed down. And there's a limitation for the U.S. to exert military power in Asia, which is far away from the U.S. So in the past, we had the terms liberal international order and Pax Americana that characterized the post-World War II era, but no longer valid. And when we look at the world, the share of Asia has been escalating. In terms of GDP, Asia takes account for 40% of global GDP, and it's also the fastest growing economic bloc. And the share of China in Asia is around half, which is tantamount to the share of other countries combined. So that's why Trump and his supporters and the cabinet members are putting emphasis on China. Elbridge Colby, who is the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, in an interview, he said because of the constraint in military forces in the U.S., Korea should be self-reliant on its defenses, and that the U.S. should turn its eyes on containing China. After Trump 2.0, we had comments that the war in Russia will end soon.
전쟁이 끝날 것.
Sometime next year even. The Ukraine war, once it is over, right now the defense industry in Korea is very much at an advantage because of the Ukraine war, and these types of benefits will continue. Why? Because Trump will continue to increase the defense cost sharing from NATO member countries. Now, another thing, once the Ukraine war is over, recovery efforts will ensue, and there are opportunities there for Korean companies, and these types of opportunities will be opportunities that the Biden administration will not have given. And once the war is over, the Russia and DPRK military cooperation will diminish, and this will be beneficial to our security landscape. And so that is why it's not all bad what Trump will bring to Korea, but what we do have to think about is, what if China invades Taiwan? What will Trump do? That's uncertain. if we look at Trump's past actions so far, he's called Taiwan just a small island. A small island nation, about suggesting that he might even be open to negotiating with Chinese on terms that involve the U.S. abandoning its support to Taiwan, saying also that the U.S. originally produced semiconductors domestically, but Taiwan surged ahead and manufactures 90% of the world's semiconductors. Taiwan has completely overtaken our semiconductor industry, so it's a completely different perspective from what we might have or what others might have. But the security elites have a different perspective, which is why if China were to invade Taiwan, what the U.S. will do, that is up in the air and it is uncertain. In September last year, I went to an international symposium in China and I was actually quite shocked. Why? Because the Chinese communist staff and experts were there, and they were talking about how whatever might be the cost, that unification of Taiwan will happen. So it's a talk all over the world, even among from think tanks, that China might invade Taiwan within President Trump's 2.0 administration. President Xi is looking for his fourth term, and compared to Mao Zedong, he hasn't really achieved as much. But if he were to achieve a unification of Taiwan, then that would truly be a milestone and a landmark. So that is also something that we need to be prepared for. China's potential invasion of Taiwan. Will the U.S. intervene? Or will it not? We don't know. Well, in any ways, we are on the precipice of a truly tumultuous time moving forward. Trump's policies require a clear understanding. Trump is truly looking at the U.S. economy as something that needs to be revived. He is desperate, and rather than simply criticizing that, we need to look more in depth at the background. Let's look at shipbuilding, for example. Its competitiveness drop is really quite grave. During the Roosevelt era, Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet Initiative propped up the U.S., and the U.S. began constructing a large navy, and this growth in shipbuilding infrastructure allowed the U.S. to rapidly produce warships and merchant vessels during World War II, and it played a decisive role in overpowering Germany and Japan. But now, the story is completely different. According to a 2021 Forbes report, out of the 44,000 merchant ships worldwide, fewer than 200 fly the American flag. And China produces over 1,000 ships annually, while U.S. shipyards produce only around 10 ships per year. And according to the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence, China's shipbuilding capacity is 233 times greater than that of the U.S. Now, that's the reason why after the confirmation of Trump's re-election, in a president call with President Yoon, Trump expressed a desire for South Korea's assistance, noting that the U.S. shipbuilding industry requires Korea's help and cooperation. He acknowledged South Korea's world-leading shipbuilding capabilities and emphasized the need for close collaboration in areas such as ship export, maintenance, and so on and so forth, not just in terms of merchant vessels, but in maintenance and repair of warships and servicing, needing Korea's assistance. And this underscores the critical shortfall that the U.S. has. So if we are to cooperate with the U.S. in this very critical area, where they are very much desperate, and we will also be able to reap the benefits. And the defense cost sharing increase is not just a demand that the Trump administration has made on Korea. It's also on other NATO member countries, and that can provide an opportunity as well. So during the second administration of Trump, it's not just about the scare. It also is pertinent upon us to look at the opportunities as well as the challenges.
네, 정승장 센터장님.
Thank you, Director Chung, for that wonderful presentation. And being on time, again, please, a warm round of applause, please. So, I'm sure that you have already known, but we have actually prepared some questions during your lecture. So we have used our web pages on mobile and internet and also our email to receive questions in advance, and let me choose one from them. So China has been growing as a fast follower, and it clashes with American strategies facing a new limitation in growth. I think it will be similar in Korea under Trump 2.0. Our defense spending could be increased and U.S. forces in Korea could be scaled down, as with the U.S.-Korean military exercises. At the same time, the subsidies under IRA for Korean businesses could be reduced. So from a broader scope, I believe that is covered under the framework of the U.S.-Korea alliance. So there can be changes in the relations with the U.S. So amidst the circumstances, how can we more strategically respond to the policies of Trump 2.0 in advance or after his inauguration? So I mentioned that the re-election of Trump would be a watershed moment in history. With the new Trump administration, there can be a surge in our defense spending, and Trump once said it should be increased by ninefold. But although it doesn't go to that extent, it will probably surge. However, if we don't accommodate the request, they might try to withdraw the troops in Korea, as they have repeatedly expressed their intention to do so. And our joint exercises with the U.S. could be scaled down under a high likelihood. And also the deployment of strategic assets on Korea could be scaled down. And in the shorter run, the North Korea could be equipped with a multiple strike ballistic missile. And they're also working on a nuclear-powered submarine. And if that can reach the U.S., there could be a scaling down or disruption in the Americans' nuclear umbrella. So although we are not nuclear armed, if we make the determination, we need the capability to build nuclear weapons in 1 to 3 months, and under emergency, we need to also consider the possibility of deployment. And President-elect Trump is not a conventional or orthodox leader. So under the Biden administration, what was prohibited may not be banned anymore under Trump 2.0. And our security interests and the economic interests of the U.S. should be balanced out. And also in terms of the economy, Trump wants to restore the American economy because its infrastructure has been collapsing. It does have core technology, but does not have the infrastructure to commercialize this. So restoration of the economy is the aspiration of Trump. So Korean companies could enter the US market to create new jobs and also grow industries. So these should be the policies or strategies that we should consider in the future. And as mentioned, China is way ahead of the US in terms of shipbuilding, has an absolute superiority. And also China has more battleships than the US, according to some analysis. And if China invades Taiwan, the US has to pull its naval force far away from the US, whereas China has its battleships right next to them. So when we consider the naval force, and shipbuilding would be a key area where we could strengthen our cooperation, and that could be the basis for expanding our cooperation to other areas as well. When President Yoon was elected, President Biden visited Korea and visited Samsung Electronics first, especially the semiconductor factory. So the interest of Biden and Trump could differ. If so, we need to understand what Trump is interested in and use that as leverage in order to reinforce our relationship in the economy and security. Thank you.
정 센터장님께
Thank you very much. Once again, a big hand to Mr. Chung for that presentation. All right, now it's time to move on to the second presentation of today. We are going to be connecting to Boston. Professor Miller from Tufts University and also author of the global bestseller Chip War. We're going to be listening to Professor Miller's lecture, and because of the time difference, the lecture was pre-recorded in advance. So we will be looking into the pre-recorded video, and following the lecture, we will have a live Q&A session with Professor Miller in the US, where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions in person and hear his responses. So ladies and gentlemen, tune in to the lecture by Professor Miller.
I'd like to congratulate the Yonhapnews agency on this first Future Economic Forum. It's an honor to have the opportunity to join this forum, and I'm delighted to see the Yonhapnews agency contributing to this important debate on semiconductor policy and the future of artificial intelligence. Well, to begin, congratulations on the first Future Economic Forum organized by Yonhapnews. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present here today on the implications of the US presidential election on the semiconductor industry and on the future of technology and artificial intelligence. If you look at the key drivers of advances in artificial intelligence over the past decades, what you find is that the primary force making artificial intelligence systems better over time has been advances in computing power provided by better and better semiconductors. This chart, for example, shows the amount of computational power used to train the machine learning system that was the most advanced of its era. And as you'll see, the amount of computing power used for training these AI systems has increased exponentially, with the rate of exponential growth increasing over the past 15 years as we've entered the deep learning era of artificial intelligence. In other words, all AI progress depends not just on better algorithms, but better semiconductors. And this is why today, across the world, all of the major economies and major governments are focused on semiconductors in a way they've never been before. It's also why when you look at competition between China and the United States, semiconductors are at the center, not only because they themselves are an extraordinarily valuable product, but also because they enable the technological advances that are believed in both countries to be likely drivers of future technological capability, economic prosperity, and also military power. Because of this, today, many of the world's leading governments are not simply targeting the semiconductor industry as an area of priority. They're focusing on growing their computing power. China, for example, has targeted a 50% growth rate in the amount of computing power in the country as it tries to compete with big US tech firms like Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet, and Amazon. And China is not alone. Many countries today are targeting growth in computing power as a metric of their success in preparing themselves for an age of artificial intelligence, which raises the question, who is going to win this race, and how will the presidential election in the United States and the victory of Donald Trump affect the US policy towards this critical sector? When you begin to examine the computing infrastructure in the world today, there really are only two key players that matter. This chart shows you the numbers of servers installed in different countries, a rough proxy for the amount of computational power that different countries have. And as you'll see, today the United States is far in the lead, China is far in position number 2, and the rest of the world is much, much smaller, smaller even than you'd expect given their relative GDPs. And that suggests that to understand the future race to build bigger and more capable computers, to deploy the computing power necessary for training AI, it will be a race between China and the United States to harness this capability. And this is a race that is going to be impacted by technology firms, by shifts in technology trends, by the impact of markets on these vast construction of bigger data centers, but also politics will play a critical role. And the fact that the US will have a new president as of January 2025 will certainly impact how this political struggle is impacting the technological and economic spheres. So what do we know about Donald Trump's plans in the semiconductor and technology sector when he returns to the White House in January 2021? The first thing that we can say is that Donald Trump has been a long-term proponent of imposing tariffs, in particular on countries that are running large trade surpluses with the United States, or that he believes have been using economic policy tools to compete unfairly with the United States. We learned this, for example, in his first term as president, when he famously tweeted that he is a tariff man. And indeed, this is a belief that he has espoused now for many decades, going back at least to the 1980s, when even 40 years ago, he was focused on tariffs as what he believed as the optimal economic policy tool. In his first term as president, Trump imposed tariffs in particular on China, but not only, either levying or threatening to levy tariffs on other major economies as well. And the tariffs that he put in place on China have generally been kept in place by the Biden administration, which indeed has actually increased the tariff rates on certain products imported from China to the United States. Now it seems Trump is likely to accelerate this tariff imposition when he returns to the White House in 2025. It's recently been announced in the media, for example, that he's appointing as his trade representative Robert Lighthizer, the exact same person who led the increase in tariffs in his first term. And it's, I think, inevitable that the electronics industry will be impacted by tariff increases because electronics are one of the most widely traded goods, and semiconductors are a key facet of this industry. Now, if you look at Trump's focus in his campaign on tariffs, he's focused primarily on China, which I think will bear the brunt of the tariff threats that Trump plans to levy. But he's also talked about imposing tariffs on other countries as well. And I think many countries, including major semiconductor producers, will begin negotiations to discuss ways to address the economic disagreements and to avoid or at least minimize the imposition of tariffs. And for semiconductor companies, this will be a critical issue to track. Today, semiconductor supply chains stretch across both sides of the Pacific. A typical chip is often manufactured in one country, packaged in a second, and assembled in a final good in a third country. And that means that tariffs can have a very significant impact both on the structure of supply chains and also on the viability of businesses' operations in specific countries. And so following the rate of tariff imposition and the types of products that are in fact tariffed will be very important for understanding the implications for the semiconductor industry. For such a globally interconnected industry, I think tariffs are likely to bring higher costs as they force supply chain restructuring and as companies adapt to try to take into account the ways that higher tariffs are impacting their cost structure in different countries. And so whether it's Japanese companies, Korean companies, Taiwanese companies, Chinese companies, American companies, they'll all be watching very closely the tariff schedules that are released, the tariff increases that are announced, and thinking through the implications for their business. After Trump began imposing tariffs in his first term, we saw significant shifts in supply chains. For example, assembly of certain types of products moved from places like China, which faced higher tariffs, to Mexico, which faced relatively lower tariffs. And I think we should assume, again, that if tariff rates increase, this will encourage companies to shift their supply chains to lower tariff destinations, which is, of course, the aspiration of the Trump administration when they begin imposing tariffs like this. So trade policy will be one of the first areas of focus of the new administration. And I think it will be quite significant for companies that are involved in international trade, as indeed every company in the semiconductor industry is. The second key policy area where I think we will see action from the Trump administration is to intensify the export control regime that currently exists that limits the sales of artificial intelligence chips, as well as chip-making tools to China. Now, of course, these restrictions have been in place for some time. They actually began, at least when you look at the chip-making tools, under the first Trump administration, which was already lobbying key allies like the Netherlands to limit the transfer of chip-making tools like extreme ultraviolet lithography systems to China. These controls took an important step upwards in intensity under the Biden administration, which, in addition to imposing further restrictions on chip-making tools, also imposed sweeping bans on the sale of high-end AI chips to China, most notably the NVIDIA GPUs like ones pictured here, which are critical for training artificial intelligence systems. Now, under the Biden administration, there's been some criticism from Republicans in Congress about loopholes in enforcement of these restrictions. And I think it's quite possible that as the Republicans take back power, they intensify both their enforcement efforts and also their closing of loopholes to make it more difficult to transfer AI chips to China and more difficult to transfer high-end chip-making tools to China as well. And as the Trump administration begins to think about the export control posture that it wants, I think it will also be thinking about potential Chinese retaliation. We've seen, for example, as the Biden administration has ratcheted up export controls on semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment, China has retaliated, or at least threatened retaliation, by imposing new export control regimes of its own, targeting key minerals and materials like gallium and germanium. And I think it's highly likely that if the U.S. Further increases restrictions on the transfer of tools to China, China will retaliate by further intensifying its threats to limit critical minerals access of Western companies in China. In addition, China has directly targeted U.S. firms or threatened to target U.S. firms in the chip industry. Chinese regulators have now refused to allow a series of merger and acquisition transactions in the semiconductor industry, ostensibly on antitrust grounds, but in reality as part of an effort to punish U.S. and Western firms over the U.S.'s semiconductor policy. In addition, we've seen, for example, last year, Micron, the U.S. chip maker and manufacturer of memory chips, faced investigations in China, which were very clearly a retaliation against U.S. pressure against China's chip industry. And so I think following the likelihood and the path of Chinese retaliation will be also important in understanding the speed and the scope at which the Trump administration chooses to expand the export control regime and try to slow China's chip-making progress. A third area of focus will, I think, be an intensification of efforts to encourage manufacturing of semiconductors in the United States. This is something that began under the first Trump administration, which encouraged Taiwan's TSMC, for example, to begin construction on a new plant in Arizona. It was intensified under the Biden administration, which has been implementing the CHIPS Act, providing subsidies for both US and foreign companies to build chip plants in the United States. And I think we should expect the Trump administration to pursue more announcements of investments in chip-making facilities. Trump has already suggested publicly that he might threaten tariffs on countries that don't announce new investments in US facilities, pointing in particular towards Taiwan. I think less likely, tariffs are actually less likely in this case, but the threat of tariffs alone will, I think, begin to shape how companies respond to these types of requests to intensify their investments in the United States. And indeed, the recent news that TSMC's yield in its Arizona facility has now matched the yield in its Taiwan facilities provides, I think, encouragement to those in the United States who would like to encourage and to subsidize and to pressure other foreign firms to invest more in the United States. We've already begun to see, I think, preemptively, some non-US chip firms try to align themselves more closely with what they expect the future US policy to be. For example, it's been reported that TSMC is going to begin more intensively imposing export controls on Chinese customers, going perhaps even beyond what's required by US law, partly, I think, as a response to the presidential election results and as a part of a desire to have policies that are more aligned with the incoming administration. And I think many foreign companies with operations in the United States will have to think carefully about how to align their policies with the likely policies of the new president and to establish relations with the new president's team. In addition to these foreign-focused aspects of the Trump administration's likely semiconductor policies, the tariffs, the export controls, the efforts to encourage foreign direct investment, there will also, I think, be a very significant domestic focus on increasing the ease with which one can build data centers and thereby encouraging future semiconductor demand. It's no secret that today the primary growth driver in the chip industry is data center demand, the provision of GPUs and high bandwidth memory that are needed to train and deploy artificially large data centers. And if you talk to data center builders or big tech companies in the United States, what you'll hear is that one of the biggest limitations to data center construction, and therefore one of the biggest limitations to building out of AI infrastructure and the purchasing of AI chips, is actually the provision of enough electricity to power the data centers that are required today and that will be required in the future. This chart from McKinsey shows the likely increase of electricity demand from data centers alone in the United States. They projected an almost 4 times increase between 2023 and the end of the decade. And the challenge to provide the electricity that data centers require is already creating both a surge of investment, but also real concern that electricity could be a limiting factor to the US data center build out, to the US AI development effort, and therefore also to the chip industry. Because if data centers can't be powered, then the rate of purchase of future chips will slow. We've already heard, for example, from the Trump administration, promises to streamline energy regulation, to make it easier, for example, to build new power plants, focusing in particular on nuclear power plants, as well as to facilitate the interconnection between grids and data centers that's required to to build data centers. And so I think we should watch very carefully U.S. energy policy, because energy policy is today a critical input to data center policy, and therefore an important determinant of the future health of the chip industry. And I think it's clear that the Trump administration is going to focus on this issue and see it as an important part of their deregulation agenda. In addition, it's now quite clear that Elon Musk will play some sort of role in the Trump administration, although the details are not yet clear. What is clear, I think, is that there will be a number of very influential voices from the technology sector advising the Trump administration, and I think encouraging a focus on artificial intelligence and on the infrastructure that's needed for the AI build-out. And this will mean that AI will be front and center, I think, of many of the administration's likely policy initiatives. This is, of course, not a change. The Biden administration have been talking about AI too, and you can trace back over many years focus on this issue. That's why, for example, the U.S. is controlling the transfer of AI chips to China. It's why the U.S. is so concerned about the resilience of its semiconductor supply chain. And so I think it's significant that the next administration, like the current administration, will have powerful and influential voices that are advocating for the construction of the type of infrastructure that AI will require. What does this mean for the world? It means that the globalized semiconductor supply chain that is already under stress after nearly a decade of intensified US-China competition is going to become even more bifurcated. I think anyone talking about a complete decoupling of the Chinese and US economies is misunderstanding the magnitude of changes. But nevertheless, we should expect ongoing bifurcation, with companies focusing on a Chinese semiconductor supply chain and a separate Western semiconductor supply chain. To some degree, this has already been underway over the past decade, but I think the combination of intensified tariffs and heightened export controls will encourage it further. And China's retaliation, which I think we should expect to these types of measures, will also encourage it. Indeed, China is only likely to double down on its drive to domesticate all of the semiconductor production that it needs as it responds to the policies that Trump is likely to impose, which means that we'll have both of the world's largest economies pushing for a more bifurcated economy, which will inevitably impose costs for companies as well as countries that have become accustomed to a unified global supply chain. But it also imposes opportunities, at least for certain countries and companies. If tariffs go up in one region, others become more competitive, for example. And companies in particular will be trying to think very carefully about how to optimize their strategy as tariff rates change, perhaps more rapidly than they ever have before. And all of this, I think, will take place amid the backdrop of further investment in bigger and bigger artificial intelligence models. And as the White House under Trump promises more electricity access and deregulation, I think this will only spur further efforts to raise billions of dollars and deploy them into AI training and AI deployment. And so the AI race will be, if anything, intensified by the presidential election result, which means that the chip war will be intensified too, because ultimately the chip war is a race to produce the chips that make AI possible and to prevent those chips from benefiting your competitor. And under the next Trump administration, I think we should expect an even more fierce competition to produce and control the chips that make AI possible and to build the AI models that the future of technology will depend on. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join you, and I look forward to the discussion.
네.
All right, thank you very much. A big hand, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, it's 1:20 a.m. in New York.
질문이 많습니다, 교수님.
We have so many questions here for you, Professor Miller, but I'm going to just pick two key questions out of that flood of questions. First, the question will be read in Korean, and then we will read it in English. So right now, the question is being read in Korean. We ask for your understanding.
기업 간의 기술력 경쟁을 넘어서 국가 대항전으로 진행되는 모습이고요. 이런 흐름 속에서 한국의 삼성전자나 SK하이닉스가 살아남기 위한 전략은 무엇이라고 생각합니까?
So here's the question in English. The semiconductor industry is now increasingly and directly affected by the growing conflict between the US and China. It's not just a competition between companies anymore, but a battle between countries. Could you provide us with your 2 cents about what you think the strategy should be for South Korean companies such as Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix to survive in such a mega competitive situation?
Thank you for the question. I think South Korean companies face a similar situation in many ways as companies from other countries, whether it's Taiwan or Japan, that are being squeezed in some ways by the China-US competition. And I think for companies in this position, they face several options for their strategies going forward. I think first, as tariff rates change, companies will naturally want to shift where they're producing and assembling goods, where they're possible to shift them to take advantage of the most optimal tariff rates. And this is something we've seen companies do extensively the past several years. I think second, companies are going to try to ensure they have as much access as possible to both the US and the Chinese market. And often companies are deciding that further bifurcation of their supply chains is part of that optimal strategy to provide a China-specific product to the Chinese market and a Western product to Western markets. And I think that dynamic will become even more pronounced going forward. I think third, companies have to think very carefully about their manufacturing base, and this is especially true in semiconductors, where there are now extensive restrictions on the types of manufacturing tools that can be used in China. And when it comes to future investments in manufacturing operations, I think we've seen across the chip industry a much less pronounced desire to invest new dollars in manufacturing facilities in China. And I think that skepticism about large-scale investments in China will likely continue going forward, both driven by uncertainty about Chinese policy and by restrictions. I think the fourth point, which is most important, is that companies to ensure they've got technological differentiation in whatever market they're competing in. And this is particularly important, not only because the chip industry is always competitive, but because in China, there is a surge of government support for exactly the type of memory chips that Korean companies specialize in. And so unless memory companies can retain their technological advantage, they'll be quickly commoditized by newer Chinese competitors. And I think that's the most important challenge for both Samsung and SK Hynix going forward.
예, 지금 밀러 교수가 말씀하신 게
Thank you very much. So to summarize,
So tariff, supply chain, manufacturing, comparative advantage. I think that can be summed up into TSMC, what Professor Miller just said. All right, we'll just dive into the second question. Thank you very much for your answer.
기술 경쟁
the question is being explained in Korean. Please wait for the English translation that will be followed next. Please be patient with us as we deliver the question in Korean. What are your thoughts on the impact of technology competition between the US and China in the semiconductor industry, and how do you see their influence changing in the future?
Well, I think thus far the technology competition between the US and China has thankfully not really impacted the rate of technological change in the industry. Often you find that when security mandates get imposed in different spheres of the economy, the rate of progress risks slowing because there are restrictions on the types of investment or transactions that can be undertaken. I think in the semiconductor industry, because almost all of the cutting edge capabilities are today outside of China, in Taiwan, in Japan, in Korea, in the Netherlands, in the United States, the restrictions on their transfer into China hasn't made a major impact because the industry's most advanced capabilities were not in China in the first place. I think what we also have seen is a surge of investment in R&D, both by companies trying to stay ahead, but also by countries trying to ensure that their chip-making ecosystems and chip design ecosystems are as advanced as possible. And I think as there's been a renewed emphasis on building chips for AI over the past couple of years, that dynamic has only intensified. And so I would expect both China and the United States to continue focusing on AI semiconductors as a primary area of innovation. And I think both the private sectors in both countries, as well as governments, are going to continue supporting this type of innovation with substantial R&D investments.
Yes, Professor Miller, thank you very much. 오늘 시간 내주셔서 대단히 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your time today, Professor. And I believe that you will have keen interest in the development of Korea's high-tech industry. Thank you.
네, 마지막에 주신 말씀.
What Professor Miller just said now was about the significant amount of investments required at the national level and how moving forward manufacturing and assembly processes focused on AI semiconductors and AI chips will be needed in the future. We are going to be looking into this in depth from Korean companies' perspectives and also TSMC's perspectives, looking at the history, the tradition, and also from a future lens as well. We will now take a brief break for about 10 minutes. Coffee and snacks are available in the lobby. The restrooms are to your left. So please take a moment to relax, sip a cup of coffee, and after the break, we kindly ask the guests seated in the back to move to the available seats towards the front, following the guide of our staff. We look forward to seeing you again in the second session, ladies and gentlemen. Please stay with us until the very end. Thank you very much.